All right, welcome. Good to see you all today out in the world.
Oh.
This is Less Stupid with Thomas Hura, a show that's completely uncut, uncensored, and unimpressed by leaders who don't care about climate change.
Oh, heck yes. That's what I like to hear.
Okay, and would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Tyee. I use he and him pronouns. I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, but I've spent the past 4 years up in college in Walla Walla, Washington.
At good old Whitman.
At good old Whitman, yes.
Right on. What's it like out there? Are you enjoying what you're studying?
Yeah. I just graduated, so I got to study environmental studies and politics, which was a really, really phenomenal program. Got to really learn some great things. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'm a big environmentalist, and I love what you do, and I know that I invited you to come and talk about this wonderful climate strike that is currently happening right now. But just because I know that people probably judge a podcast by the first 2 minutes, and I want to dispel some possible inaccurate notions about environmentalists, about the Green New Deal. What do you think maybe are some misconceptions people might have about either of the things I just mentioned?
About environmentalists, I think there's often this misconception that environmentalists are all white hippies.
Right.
And I think if you're looking at who has been fighting the hardest for environmental changes and environmental justice, it's often been the people who are on the front lines of environmental injustices. So a lot of indigenous communities have been fighting the hardest for environmental justice, and a lot of poor and black and brown communities and around the country that have toxic waste sited in their communities are having to fight for their lives, to fight for the environment.
Right. The people of Flint, Michigan, or people in the Bronx in New York that are just experiencing some of the worst air quality.
Yeah.
AOC having been such a major proponent of rolling out the Green New Deal.
Mm-hmm.
What I had kind of heard about, even she might have acknowledged that the rollout wasn't the strongest. Maybe there wasn't enough detail in the legislation, or what do you think about that?
Yeah. So the way that it was rolled out is they put forward a resolution, and it's just a 16-page short document, and it doesn't say necessarily all of the specific policies that are supposed to happen, and I don't think necessarily that it should.
I understand that completely.
Yeah,
it's a resolution. It's not a bill.
Yeah. It's about saying what are our goals, what do we want to happen, and not necessarily saying, okay, here are all of the very intricate steps of how that's going to happen, because when the legislation goes through that it's going to support the Green New Deal, it's going to be a lot longer and it's going to be a lot more complicated because there are a lot of details you have to include. In terms of the rollout, I think there were some internal memos within people's staff that were we're gonna get rid of all the cows, or stop cows from farting, and stop people from going on planes.
Right.
And so that was something that was kind of staffers were joking around about, and then became public, and so then all of a sudden a lot of news media picked that up and was AOC wants to kill all the cows and just ground all of our planes.
Yeah, absurd rhetoric about that. And here's one of the things that I think is really difficult to impart in people in terms of a knowledge standpoint. It's just that so many of the technologies we're in love with have not been around for more than a generation or two, or even less than a generation. So, yes, there is some environmental rhetoric around we are going to get people out of the air more. We're going to burn less fossil fuels. We're going to, the plastic straw is the most kind of controversial one that people kind of make fun of, but it's also incredibly legitimate. A plastic straw is a waste of plastic, except for the fact that you have one 12-ounce drink. You know what I mean?
For the most part,
it's one of the most silly things to consume every single day.
Yeah, I want to push back a little bit on plastic straw bans.
Please do.
As a thing, because I think that's plastic straws are unnecessary for much of the population, most of the population, but there are many disabled people who need plastic straws as their way to drink, and so fighting for wholesale plastic straw bans is not necessarily the way to go for that specific thing. And
also when you focus so much on that, it takes away from the the reality of the majority of the pollution in the United States happening under a small number of companies that are the fossil fuel industry burning immense amounts of carbon, and now we're at 415 ppm, and that has pretty little to do with the individual choices of poor or disabled people on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think there are like things that everybody can do in their individual lives that have an impact, right. But also, as you're doing that, recognize that like the greater imperatives to really focus on large scale action, right. that makes like making environmental choices more accessible for people, because you're not gonna get everybody to go vegan unless you right. have like the ability to eliminate a lot of the food deserts that people are facing. Like it's about creating accessibility, I think, to make environmental choices more than it is trying to force everybody to make like the smartest environmental choice.
Right. That's interesting. I want to talk a little bit about the climate strike event on it was on the 20th, right? Mm-hmm. And the Waymore's Free Speech Plaza. But I think you made a great point, and maybe we could educate people about the term environmental racism, which is specific to race, but it touches on what you had mentioned before about how, Eugene is going to be a climate refuge for one thing, and we know that globally, a disproportionate amount of climate refugees are people of color, low-income people in island communities, people in impoverished like coastal communities. And I don't know, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I like absolutely that's true. I think there's a lot of I think environmental racism though is something that I didn't know about for a long time. Like it right. wasn't something that I learned about until I got to college. Right. But I think it's really important to when we think about like how we're fighting for climate justice, because you have to think that the impacts are already disproportionately affecting a lot of like particularly Black communities in the United
right.
States. It's
right.
I think
it's just one way that community of Americans has been constantly subjugated, relegated to the worst parts of American cities. If you look at urban planning, putting highways and interstates through cities, you're almost certainly going to go through a Black or brown community. And like one thing that I want people to understand is the Civil War never ended. Something Martin Ball, my high school teacher, told me, and it's so real because that's just not how history works. I mean, yes, wars are easy to record in history because they have a start date and an end date, and there are a lot of deaths, and everybody kind of gets all rah jingoistic about things. But the reality is that when a war is officially done, a conflict still almost certainly persists, and that's really true with the Civil War in America. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, we have this very strange idea that, the civil rights movement was a period of time in the 60s, and then it kind of ended. And then, well, what do we refer to, with the 70s and Malcolm X and the Black Panthers? At what point do we say that chapter of racial justice is kind of over? Well, we don't. Mm-hmm. We don't. The only people that are really trying to say kind of get over racism are generally privileged. Well, not all, but they generally tend to be privileged white people or people that privileged white people like are really excited to lift up as an example. Maybe that's just my perception. Fox News loves to get, African American or Hispanic people to talk as conservatives, because while those people of course do exist, it's just they get to easily make it look as though they deeply care about those communities by kind of tokenizing and using individuals. Yeah. And saying my best friend is a Black person who doesn't like environmentalism. I don't know.
There's tons of money to be made as the Candace Owens of the world.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. That's one of my beefs with my hero Kanye is, he really seems to love Miss Owens. And, I mean... Do you like Kanye? Because this is a podcast, by the way, that's about education. Right today, it's definitely about the environment, but it's about politics. It's about news and music and art. It's just, I like to try to, talk about what my guest is going to be interested in. Yeah. So the first question is, do you like Kanye? And second of all, what music do you like?
I like Kanye, but I haven't listened to that much Kanye. So I feel like it's a failing on my part, probably. I apologize to the viewers.
Right. But what music do you like?
Lately I've been listening. I've kind of gone all over the place. When I was growing up, I was like all like 80s rock was like the thing, and now I've been listening to a lot of like folk, but also some like folk, but more politically motivated. So some of my favorite like artists are Nako and Medicine for the People, and
Cool.
like Michael Franti and Spearhead. Those kind of.
Do you
groups.
like Citizen Cope?
I am unfamiliar with Citizen Cope.
Cool.
My music
I
education
didn't know those first two artists, so that's exciting.
My music education is often like a little underdeveloped, shall I say.
That's perfectly fine. The funny thing is, the more I get old and think about, for example, health, and public health, I'm sure is probably a part of, the Green New Deal too. In broad terms. But music it's an art, it's a resource, it's an activity, it's a hobby, it's a communal thing. But I also think of it in kind of a prescriptive way. Like, if we can prescribe cannabis, if we can prescribe Ritalin or Zyprexa or, I don't know, freaking all sorts of different pharmaceutical drugs, opiates. I don't know if we're going to get to a point where like MDs start prescribing Metallica. but like what I'm saying is it's a resource, it's something you do consume, not orally, but through your ears, and it puts you in a different mood, it puts you in a different mind state. So for you to say that you don't have a great musical education, sure, maybe you're not as like obsessed with it as I am, but clearly, well, I'm assuming you're a happy person. You seem pretty chipper. And so if you don't need to listen to a bunch of music every day and study up on who the new artists are in every genre, then I'd say the music industry is doing right by you. And you're doing, you know what I mean? You consume enough. You don't have to be obsessed with it like I am. You have your own things that you geek out about.
Yeah. I think that's true. I also think it's one of those things that I think it impassions so many people. Right. It's like one of those like cultural like fabrics that you want to be able to tap into. You want to be able to connect with other people by connecting through like different forms of pop culture, and I think music is a especially big part of that.
No
it's
doubt.
Always like something that you hear about a new artist and then you're really excited to share that with somebody.
Absolutely. Well, we could talk about music and stuff for a little while, because I want my podcast to also talk a lot about racial justice, which we've already done a little bit. And I think there are two popular culture domains where Black people, but pretty much all marginalized people, but I'm talking specifically mostly about Black people in terms of athletics and music, have been spaces where African Americans have kind of been able to demonstrate their undeniable skill in times when they didn't have rights and as much, and those groups still don't have enough rights, in my opinion. But generally speaking, de jure racism has transitioned more into de facto racism, and it's less that we have Jim Crow laws that segregate, but more that, well, the people who wrote the Jim Crow laws still have all the money, and their sons and daughters are still running a lot of things, and still kind of like using policies in a more backhanded way. But all I'm saying is that, for example, when Michael Jackson broke onto MTV, that was a big deal for, Black history. And when Michael Jordan in the 90s became pretty much undeniably the greatest basketball player ever, and before that it was probably either Wilt Chamberlain or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, just in the scale of our young country, because the United States is young, it's been fascinating and cool to watch, underrepresented groups kind of take on. No, you can't watch an NBA game anymore without seeing a bunch of black men working together and achieving something very cool. Yeah. That I think is awesome.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
And that's been the case for obviously our whole lives, but it wasn't the case in the 50s, or in the 40s. They still had very predominantly white people, and they had really short shorts, and they dribbled all goofy, and they couldn't dunk.
Yeah.
Or it wasn't a big part of the game until Dr. J.
Yeah.
God, you know what I said that I was gonna tailor this podcast episode to what you're interested in. Then I just started telling you about like classic basketball players.
I do love classic basketball players.
Good.
So.
Good. Well, your dad is nasty at billiards. He schools me. Yeah. Yeah. How do you feel like in terms of debriefing the climate strike event? Did it meet your expectations? And maybe I'll just open the floor about how that went for you, because for people who don't know, you did a lot on the mic.
I did, yeah. I did a little bit more on the mic than I was necessarily intending to, but we had like a huge coalition of people who were helping to plan and organize and set up the climate strike events, and I was one of the folks who was helping to organize the speakers. And so in between speakers and like kind of to get things moving, I was trying to pitch in to let folks know what was happening.
Right.
And so that was yeah, I thought it was a really, really cool event. It was one of the biggest like actions that's happened in Eugene in the last like 5 or so years, at least.
Sure, absolutely.
And it was worldwide. It was the largest climate action since basically
2014, maybe.
Because
I went to the People's Climate March in New York City. That was pretty, as one geographic area, as a standalone event, that was pretty giant.
Yeah. In New York City especially, the People's Climate March was enormous in 2014. There was somewhere around 400,000 people who were part of it.
We took a bus from Minnesota. God, the shocks on the bus were fucked. And I was right above the most rear wheel, and it was like every little bump on the road, we were jumping up and down. Literally, my best friend, well, not my best friend, my friend Leland at the time, and I at the time, I'm sorry that I'm dirty out about this memory, it's just that it was like so bumpy, you had to make the most of it. And people were sleeping on the floor in the aisle because we had so many activists from Carleton College who wanted to go to New York City and participate. It was great. But I just was like, fuck it, I'm going to start bumping rap music. So I put on Childish Gambino Because the Internet album, and I just started like air rapping because the whole place is already bumping up and down. Anyway, it was awesome. It was awesome. And then he got in with his music, and it was very cool.
That's very pretty cool. Awesome.
Yeah, but I mean, it was extraordinary that, I mean, we it was like what, 20 hours there. We participated for like 18 hours and we got back 20 hours again. It was a huge excursion.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, you know, because I try to, like our friend Tiger Gruber, I want to play contrarian a little bit. All right. I want to try to have broad appeal. One of the criticisms of that event was when all the activists left New York City, they left a lot of trash.
Mm-hmm.
Oops, you know?
Yeah.
You know, but do you think that people generally are too quick to criticize like little things like that in environmental movements? Because, you know, New York City's full of trash anyway. Mm-hmm. You know, like, and we have such a polarized society where if you look at the source of where criticism is coming from, you can almost always see where the bias is coming from. You know, it's really rare that a lot of liberal and climate activist people will make that point. It's mostly people who are, well, they would have criticized that event regardless of how much trash it was. They would have found something to latch on to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's oftentimes you'll get like bad faith arguments of like, oh, they left a bunch of trash. Are these going to be the people who are on their like off days going to be picking up trash? Probably not. And it's also like thinking then in the broad scheme of things, like, yeah, you all drove 20 hours to get to an event in New York City, and there's always like these complaints about these people are driving to get to a protest, right. And so then they're saying, well, they're wasting all this gas. But these, like, if you're thinking about what actually needs to make change, I was talking earlier about accessibility and creating broader accessibility. You're not going to get that if you don't have the mass action to say like, this is what we need right now. And so if people need to get there by car, people need to get there by car, because we're about demanding bigger changes.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And I love seeing the shifts in technology, automobiles, you know, automobile technology that are becoming a lot more friendly to people who don't want to burn a shitload of fossils. Mm-hmm. You know, that's what we do. We burn trilobites, you know, and we just shoot them off into the air and assume that it'll be okay and that our great grandkids won't care.
Yeah.
I think they will.
My biology is not good enough to remember how long ago trilobites were, but
I think that was Cambrian explosion. Yeah. I memorized the entire geological time scale for Intro Geo at Carleton. And we had an exam, And there was like 24. It was like Holocene, Pleistocene, all sorts of these periods and eras. And if you got one thing wrong, you failed the quiz. It was terrible. It was terrible.
But you did it.
Well, yeah, he let us retake it. Yeah. That was one of the things about it. So we both go to small liberal arts colleges, or at least you graduated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I did too. So we both have that experience, I should say. And I loved my school. I think I did experience pretty much like all of the negatives that come with, a $60,000 a year, highly privileged, rural. So it tends to be very not diverse in terms of the town and the school. You have some of those kind of like performative, privileged 19-year-old social justice leftists who, for example, they want to stand up for their marginalized friends, and they're very sincere about it. But one of the things that's tough is that people in large groups make mistakes. Mm-hmm. People in large groups will, I don't know, like call out culture can be frustrating because if you have a small school, for example, like we went to, how big is Whitman?
It was like 1,500, 1,600, somewhere in that range.
Right.
Yeah.
And in Walla Walla, and mine was 2,000 students in Northfield, Minnesota, both quite small and claustrophobic maybe by year 3 or 4 is kind of how I felt. I kind of lost exactly what my question was, but I just think that one of the things that well-educated people, let's say, make the mistake of doing sometimes is not trying to be more accessible and reach out more to, let's say, like people who voted for Trump. There are educated Trump voters, no doubt, but like when you get into this echo chamber, and you should have conversations about intersectionality, but sometimes you bring up a word like that, and if you just assume everybody knows it and you put it out on social media, I think one of the ways that this polarization has kind of continued to manifest is that it's harder, like algorithms make it harder for you to continually have real friendships and connections with people that you have serious disagreements with politically.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook knows, and it assigns, like on a scale of 5, I think, very liberal, moderate, moderately conservative, or very conservative. I think it told me I'm very liberal. I didn't like that. I just like, I just don't like to be labeled because it comes with so much baggage.
Yeah.
Because like I'm pretty pro gun rights. I'm pretty pro free speech, and a podcast is that kind of a format. Or like I'm a hip hop artist, so I don't like people telling other people what they can't say. That's why I like having an uncut, uncensored podcast. Is I like saying you can say anything. Sure, there are consequences for what you say, but I'll put it out. Like, let's say you said a slur right now. Well, depending on what the slur was, I would probably just say, hey man, that was a ridiculous thing to say. I don't want you to say that again, and when we talk about it, maybe. I don't think I want to censor what you said, though. I don't think I want to erase that you said it. So when I see this liberal versus conservative thing, and part of it too is I'm running for a nonpartisan office. Mayor of Eugene represents all of Eugene, and it doesn't even show if you're D or R on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
I just I worry about that. Do you find that you have close friendships with people who literally are like, I think climate change doesn't matter? Because there's a lot of people like that.
I don't think so. And I think one of the reasons that I feel like that's the case, I have friends who will ignore kind of activism or like don't want to engage in a lot of like conversations about that kind of thing. But of people my own age, I don't really have any friends who are climate deniers per se. There was 1 or 2 people in my college who I was friends with and who I could engage in conversation. But one of the things is that I think like caring about climate change often served to me as a litmus test for how people like care about other people.
Sure.
And I think there's like many degrees of that, but I think there are like things where you can see where some people are like not being compassionate towards other people, and that's something that like sort of grinds at me. That said, I think that there's like when you were talking about like being kind of frustrated with call out culture or cancel culture,
Mm-hmm.
I think something there that's really interesting. I've talked to some people, or I had a friend at school who talked a lot about like call in culture, and it's basically
I like that.
and it's basically like
That
trying
sounds.
to
It's
say,
more about a tone and approach because you can have the same principles, but it's about tone and approach and humanity.
yeah,
I think that when you come from a place of love, it's palpable, it's susceptible. Social media takes away from that when you leave a comment and nobody knows what your tone is. And a lot of the actual engagement with Facebook nowadays, since people in our generation use Instagram and Snapchat a lot, it's that I see is about politics, probably just because that's the kind of stuff I engage with, so it shows me more of that. But you just CNN, New York Times, KVAL, KMTR, Register Guard, Oregonian, Oregon Live. These people have these pages. They post an article, and you immediately know that it's just going to be a bloodbath in the comments.
yeah.
It's maybe because that tone isn't there. So I like what you said about call in. It's because call out, unfortunately, has the effect of marginalizing people, let's say on a small college campus. We basically, there was a local news article in Minnesota about my college, and it was kind of a clickbaity headline, but it was, "What happened to the Carleton College Republicans?" Because they didn't maintain enough membership, so they just kind of faded away, because it's known as such a progressive space. But 18 to 22-year-olds need to, let's say, here's a better articulation of my point. 18 to 20-year-olds are children. You were. You still kind of are, and I still kind of am too, but a little less. I'm 25. Children need to be able to thoroughly engage with arguments that they hate. There are a lot of arguments, not people, but arguments, perspectives, philosophies, policies that I hate. Redlining, bailing out Wall Street. There are things that I hate, but you have to be able to like study and have the intellectual discipline to be able to factually take down those kinds of arguments. Because I think if you don't, you can end up looking dumb in front of somebody who is conservative and has a well-researched body of knowledge. One example I'll point to, people might not like, is Ben Shapiro. So Ben Shapiro says a bunch of things I hate. He has a bunch of crappy takes on music and politics. And
I think I know what you're talking about in terms of his music takes.
Yeah, he just he likes to talk like this, and he says it's really fast just to make it sound like he's quick, like he really knows what he's talking about. He doesn't. And I like doing impressions. I'm not always good at it. But he resonates, and something that my fellow liberal friends often fail to acknowledge, even in one-on-one conversations, is I literally think that if you're too extreme as a leftist in your rhetoric, maybe not in your principles, but in your rhetoric and the way you conduct yourself around people, you push moderates to the right. I think people do that. I don't think that happened at the climate march. I think it was a celebration. I think it was about, what are we going to do for our children? We had a lot of clever signs that were a lot of fun. And I'm not pointing to a lot of examples, but I just genuinely really do feel like if you look statistically at the Obama coalition from 2008 and 2012, from when he defeated McCain and Romney, many of those people in Obama's second term got tired of what they perceived as race war or whatever, and then they voted for Trump because Trump got a lot of Obama voters. And that's a tough fact to reckon with, because the funny thing is, even as I criticize the state, the status quo, not Obama, the state of people doing that in response to Obama and his cabinet and his agenda, Obama was actually like pretty conservative in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So that's the issue. It's like, to refute myself, you might as well just go hard on the left because the right is going hard, and why temper your passion if you really want to get carbon out of the air, or if you really want to get Me Too movement to be prominent, and you really want to get racial justice for Indigenous Americans and Latinx people and African Americans people. Like, we have to fight hard, but I don't know about how we go forward in a way that specifically brings in rural, working class and poor, predominantly white, let's say fundamentalist religious people. Those people need to be on board with climate change too.
Mm-hmm.
It's tricky.
Tricky. Yeah, I think you bring up some like really interesting points, I think, in terms of like why would people choose to vote for Trump, and like, is it worth it to take extreme tactics in order to bring people in?
Right.
And I think like one of the things I think back to is like the Tea Party movement was one of the most effective political movements.
2010 was a big red year.
Yeah, and it came from people just like pushing the agenda on one side.
Yep.
And
Occupy Wall Street, probably not as politically effective.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of followed up around 2011, I would say, as not a direct response, but similar grassroots energy.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons that the Occupy Wall Street movement like struggled, and I think one of the major ones was that they didn't have anything like any of their like clear goals in mind. So they
purposely eschewed the idea of central leadership.
Mm-hmm.
They did mic checks. Someone who wanted to talk, they would say mic check. Everybody else would repeat mic check, and they would do. It was called human mic, where do we want to go and camp out over there? Do we want to go and camp out over there, or do we want just like very cool, completely not using real microphones like you and I are using, ways to human beings to amplify ideas and sound.
Mm-hmm.
It was cool, but you're right. It was clearly about income inequality. You could probably, and historians, let's say Bernie Sanders gets elected president, historians will probably say that wouldn't have happened without Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah, I mean, I think Occupy Wall Street,
we are the 99%.
A lot of people, and it had a moral claim to bring in the working class.
Yes.
But it didn't necessarily.
And the poor.
And the poor, absolutely. And I think that the one thing that I think it struggled with was it talked a lot, like people were talking a lot about income inequality. And I think some really good things came out of that. I think a lot of homeless activism has come out of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And I think like certain policies like talking about wealth taxes wouldn't probably have happened without like Occupy Wall Street movements really kind of identifying like a us and them sort of thing. But I think it also struggled because there wasn't necessarily like something big that they were moving towards, and bringing in that many people, like democracy is super messy.
The Tea Party was mostly about having less taxes.
Yeah.
Which that's an easy thing to accomplish, kind of, in a way. It's a very clear goal, and there are a lot of politicians who, that's a pretty easy sell.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's challenging about being on the left, is that people don't like taxes. so government needs revenue to function. And we like the roads. We like not everybody likes the schools, not everybody likes the police, but people generally like emergency services. People generally like having a library, things that cost money. And then the entirety of, let's talk a little about economics broadly, like economic inequality and where the hell we're going to morally choose to go with our economy.
Mm-hmm.
Because especially with Green New Deal, it's inspired directly by FDR, my favorite president. I'm a Japanese American who thinks FDR is the best president of all time. Isn't that wild? That's how you know I have neutrality. I have objectivity. He was a great president. Served for 12 years. I think presidents should be able to serve longer than 8 years, by the way. But with Green New Deal, it's about jobs. Mm-hmm. It's not just about having a green planet. Everybody wants to have the trees stick around and not have smog in LA and Houston. But fundamentally, it's about getting away from a transportation economy, from a food industry that's just laid to waste the state of the climate.
Yeah. I mean, it's about restructuring our entire economy and basically the way we live. And I think what it does is it pays really close attention to who's being hurt the most in the current economy.
Right.
And hopefully we can work to change that. One of the, I think, biggest things that people lose out on when we think about climate change, when we talk about like climate science and like parts per million, is we lose out on the fact sometimes that climate change impacts so many other social problems. Like when we're talking about
how could it not?
Yeah.
We're in it right now.
Yeah.
My hands are flapping around in some clean Eugene air.
Yeah.
You think when I get off the fucking plane at JFK, I breathe in and go, tasty, delicious air in New York. It's gross. I don't mean to say people who are living there are gross, but literally like breathing after a couple of weeks was different.
Yeah.
It wasn't that I was in pain, but there was like a discomfort in my chest every time I go back there. And then you adjust and acclimate to it. And I spent a lot of time in the middle of Central Park, but walking around the pond, which is gorgeous. But you are so right. The climate affects every single other issue in ways that some issues actually kind of don't.
Yeah. And I think one of the big things is like thinking about how do we achieve climate justice with and sometimes that means not necessarily like focusing directly on climate change when we talk about issues. One of the biggest things is like when I think about like homelessness or migrant justice, those aren't necessarily concerns that are going, like they are deeply like homeless people are deeply impacted by climate change. And migrants, like there's been tons of, this is a record year for climate refugees.
Right.
But like you're not going to be able to solve those problems just by reducing the parts per million.
Right.
We're gonna have to figure out better ways to house people. We're gonna have to improve housing to have better insulation, to have less reliance on fossil fuels within our housing. And then we're gonna have to reform our immigration system to basically like we're gonna have to allow a lot more climate refugees in, or else we're gonna be literally killing people. We are literally killing people,
right? But
we will be literally killing more people.
Well, one thing I love about politics, I'm obsessed with politics. It's like my sports.
Mm-hmm.
I watch it and I check on. My YouTube is mostly just Andrew Yang videos at this point, what it recommends to me, but also generally like, all sorts of political networks and channels. And I kind of want to become one, frankly. Less Stupid is a show. It's a podcast, but here we are on YouTube. Hi, YouTuber people.
Hello, YouTube.
Yeah.
Subscribe something.
Yeah. Whatever the fuck. I don't want to be that corny yet. This is the first episode. Come on, we can't get that crazy.
Obviously, first episode. We're here.
Right. But it's about leadership. And so politics, the word politics, what are you referring to? Pretty much just like who can be popular in a large group of people. And that has a lot of, when are we going to have another president who visibly has a disability? Probably not going to be for a while, possibly, because we care so much about appearance and about this outdated rah-rah strongman notion of strength. Yeah. That if a person, even though he was the greatest president, was in a wheelchair. I'm not sure the best way to say that because a lot of people don't like the phrase wheelchair bound, but who used a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. And you would probably know best because I don't have anyone in my direct family who uses a wheelchair.
Yeah, wheelchair user is a good one.
Yeah. And kind of lost my train of thought. There's a bug on the ground. But leadership is so important. Any society of any scale. Right now, we are a 2-person group. We're a 2-person society, you could even say. Sorry, dude, I'm the leader. Like we have to have a leader. And so, do you think? Let's just talk politics. Like, is anybody resonating with you enough where you could say, I want that person to take on 45?
I mean, yeah, I think there are people who are resonating with me. I think right now Bernie Sanders has the strongest climate plan. He's got the strongest healthcare plan.
2.5 trillion he proposed for housing.
Yeah. And it's expensive. It's
Absolutely.
recognizing that like we're gonna have to pay in order to be able to change a lot of inequities in our society. Right. And I think another big thing that I really like about Bernie, and something that I've always been like nervous about with politics, is I'm always afraid of like lionizing or celebrating leaders too much.
Of course.
Because I think you have to be able to
History
criticize.
does that way too much.
Yeah.
It's so much about singular figures instead of communal movements.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think Bernie has done really well is focusing on building a movement. And trying
even after he lost, Our Revolution is basically a group that he passed on his campaign infrastructure and made it into a progressive, group that supports other progressive candidates. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think also like something that I think has been really powerful, like he's used his campaign like infrastructure to support other like justice initiatives. Like one of the big ones was when there were ICE raids going on. He was sending out emails through about that and trying to help people with that. And so one of the things is that like I support Bernie Sanders, but I support Bernie Sanders more for the movement that Bernie Sanders is trying to build than I do for supporting Bernie Sanders as an individual person. Because I think we have to be able to criticize our leaders. And I think one of the things is when we like, one of the big things about like when Trump got elected is that people feel the need, a lot of Trump supporters feel the need to just defend anything that Trump does. And so it's just like building this aura around a person where they become untouchable, where nothing they do becomes criticizable. And I think that's just like really dangerous.
Terrible. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like I want a candidate who I can support and who I think fights for me, but I also want a candidate who I think that I can criticize and I think will do better.
It just what I am frustrated about is the Republican Party seeming to never bring a smart person all the way through to the end of the primary. Romney was reasonably intelligent, but he was terrible, and Obama was just better. But in terms of who they elect, George H.W. Bush, not a particularly smart guy in my opinion. Some people think he's all savvy. I think he got lucky. Mm-hmm. He was, if you really study, it's so like homeroom classroom, like middle school classroom. Like if you really look at like politics on a big scale, Reagan is just this Hollywood guy. Yeah. This Hollywood cowboy guy who marches in there and needs like a more established conservative guy with glasses to like fill out his ticket. Then he wins, and then he passes on the presidency with his ridiculously terrible policies that are quite popular. Mm-hmm. Oregon voted for Reagan. Yeah. Reagan I think is the last presidential candidate that won, and I think it was in '84 when he was immensely popular in time for his re-election. And then you got HW who was a nerd. Mm-hmm. Who was kind of a dweeb, not a nerd, but a dweeb. I mean that lovingly because I'm a nerd and a dweeb, right? And he said, "Read my lips, no new taxes," and he was just feckless. He was feckless. So then you get this fat bully who was Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like that because he's a friendly guy, but it's the economy, stupid. Mm-hmm. That was his whole thing, was just being brash. I mean, being a populist.
He was folksy, and he like appealed to a lot of people because they saw like he was the cool guy in the room. He was the guy everybody wanted to be friends with, mm-hmm. even if he didn't necessarily have the best policies.
Right, and he was a Southern Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Carter and him, Southern Democrats. I don't think the Democratic Party likes to vote for New Yorkers like Hillary. I mean, well, she's not really, she's kind of, by the time she ran for president, she was too steeped in the game, dog. Mm-hmm. Like, the Democrats need to realize, Pete Buttigieg actually said this pretty accurately, is Democrats never win with the most established candidate coming out of the gate. Joe Biden is not going to be the nominee. I think that's almost certain.
I would hope so.
Yeah, because it's all about name recognition. It's immensely early in the race right now. You know, and so, Obama freaking eked past Hillary around April of 2008, and we're in September now, and Warren is already number one in at least one poll that I saw.
Mm-hmm.
So
in Iowa usually.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of good leaders. But you said something about how there are a lot of Trump voters, sadly, who will defend him no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real problem. One thing that will be a problem for a while unless we can all kind of find a way to agree on how to fix it is that media. What do I mean by media being a problem? I think the corporate profit motives on media, it sucks to me that the groups, the people who dispense information, it's their job to dispense information, not noodle bowls like I want to do, not I don't know, entertainment like athletes and musicians do, but dispensing information, journalists.
Mm-hmm.
The people with the most authority and credibility in our communities are like these freaking outsiders who are just communications majors from Tennessee, and they come to work at KVAL or KMTR or whatever, and they have extremely non-Eugene based narratives that they're pushing. Gatehouse Media owns Register Guard, for example.
Mm-hmm.
The thing with those sources of information is that you can get good information from them, and many a times they're doing their best. But you have to, I sound like a social studies teacher. You have to be able to evaluate your source and not use anything as the only source. Even Facebook, which is an aggregator, like social media platforms aggregate. I could see conservative-leaning sources and liberal-leaning sources in there. But still, ultimately, I'm just using Facebook. And Facebook, one of the challenges of that, Instagram more so, is brevity. Unless you read a scholarly, you tap a link that someone shares for a scholarly JSTOR article of 40 pages, you're almost never getting good information. InfoWars is the name of what's his name? That idiot. I'm not even gonna say his name. I know his name. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah. And they're turning the frogs gay.
Right, they're turning the frogs gay. I got news for you. It's natural to be gay. The frogs have been gay since they were tadpoles, fucking in the ponds. And so, where's my point? I'm becoming such a podcast host. Part of why I called the show Less Stupid is because podcasts are a stupid medium, dude.
Why is that?
Okay, if you listen to like a really produced podcast where it's more like a radio play or like an audio kind of like a radio lab kind of thing, sure, that's fine. That's kind of legitimate. But the problem with what you and I are doing is this takes no effort, and we have credibility because we're talking into microphones and we're on a screen. Yeah. And that's the reality of what the Joe Rogan Experience, for example, is. And many podcasts by talking heads are. It's the simple. I could say anything I want, and there isn't an expectation for me to cite my source. So, I could tell you that, Lane County suicides are up 400% since 2000. And the reality is they're up about 80%. But that to me is troubling because all I'm saying is information is hard to agree on. That's for sure. And bringing it back to presidential politics, knowing that when Obama gets elected, Fox News is going to spend their entirety of their time conflating everything he does as some kind of radical far left Marxist, Kenyan fucking whatever. And then when Trump gets elected, the sad part about his whole fake news BS is that he's not incorrect about some things. There are many media sources that are hyper focused on his flaws and don't do a good enough job of covering the things he does that I think are actually good. So here's a question, and it's a big question, and I'll try to set it up in a way that isn't a giant ramble, which is a challenge for me. Do you think, and it's one of these two things, that we're so divided now, and it would be great to go back to a time maybe in the late 90s, in, the 80s, maybe even during 2003 when we were all fairly united about the stupid Iraq war. Even a lot of Democrats, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden voting for it. Do you think that there is an ideal time we could go back to a little bit and say, you know, man, it was better in 2007. It was better than in 2000. In 1997 or 8, when we were most focused on Lewinsky, you know, being a big national political scandal, you know, and Bill Clinton's extramarital affair. Do you think that we could learn from those times when we were more united as a country? Or the second option is all that unity was an artificial kind of made up thing. Like the 50s, the white picket fence, the 2.5 children is a manufactured, media fabricated image for people to aspire to, because Americans like to inspire to individualism and success of their own people, you know, kind of as an identity from the very beginning, from the revolutionaries. Is the idea that we were more united before kind of a fabrication? Because, for example, the people left out of that narrative are like everybody who wasn't a wealthy, white, able-bodied, you know, cisgendered male, generally speaking. What do you think about that? Is it that we were united before, or that was kind of made up?
Okay. I think... Oh, that's a tough one. I think... So you're asking, like, can we... Like, is there a possibility that, like, there is a unity that's, like, a true unity rather than, like, some, like, image that we're trying to portray on society? And I think we can, like, learn things from the past in times of unity. Like, one of the things about the Iraq War, like, and that unity per se, even though there were definitely a lot of people who came out against the Iraq War. I remember the very first.
Oh yeah, my dad and I were never for it.
yeah. I think there were a lot of people, but one of those things is like you have to build a common enemy. It's like it's hard to unite people,
right?
When you don't have like a common thing you're fighting against, like, and so. That's like, you know, you kind of have to create like an in-group and an out-group, and the out-group can be like something that's not even human. Like one of the things is I think about like how would we get the most unity, and it's like Independence Day or something like that. Like a alien invasion would probably lead to human unity.
Don't talk about blowing up the White House on my podcast, Tyee.
I'm probably on too many lists already. So
somehow I want to ask you about borders, man. Okay. That's that word could be interpreted in a lot of ways. I think there's a lot of BS rhetoric on extreme right kind of media channels. The Democrats are for open borders. Nobody's for open borders in the mainstream political sphere. It's not an electable position to have.
Yeah.
So nobody's for open borders. People have a different idea on what border security looks like, how it should be funded, what infrastructure and mechanisms are in place, whether we need a giant wall in places where there's already a fucking river, for example. Like, it's just, you know, in the U.S., we don't have many because our state borders are pretty ineffectual. You know, they just kind of determine where you pay taxes and stuff, but anybody can freely travel. Whereas if you go to the Israeli-Palestinian region of the world, or you go to Africa, where so much of those states, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Senegal, and Cameroon, and you go all the way down, South Africa, Lesotho, and so much of that was constructed out of conquest. One of the things I see from generally hippies, let's say, and I kind of consider you a hippie, I kind of consider your whole family to be kind of hippie, and it's beautiful and I love it, is that this idea of like, oh, let's get rid of borders, you know, like no human is illegal on stolen land. I agree with that. But do you believe in a world where in the entirety of the world eventually we will allow for free open travel of people like everywhere?
I think we should.
Right, I thought you were going to say that.
Yeah.
See, I don't.
So like I want to go into this like a little bit because like I guess the big question is, what is the point of borders? Like,
of course,
why do we have like these lines? And it's to define who we are and who we aren't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think
also elements of safety
potentially, but if we look at what the U.S. Mexico border does, for example, which I think is like the border that we all focus on. The U.S. Mexico border is not built for U.S. safety by any means. The security apparatus that's been built up since really like 1960s, but even more so, especially 1990s. That's built to destabilize people. It's built to like really hurt, I think. Like if we look at the fact that we hyper militarized a lot of
That's fine. I'm gonna see if that's still rolling too.
Okay.
Go on.
Yeah, so I think I think there's like a lot of changes that need to be made before I personally see as an end the ability to move freely, because I think restricting the ability to move freely. I'm doing this again.
No, I try not to touch it, but go on. Just go on.
Gotcha.
It's not a good stand.
I think the ability to move freely enables people to have more safety in where they're at and what they do. So when I think about like what the point of the border is, if we're talking about safety, I think there's very easy ways to regulate entry and exit that regulates like dangerous things, rather than trying to regulate like people. Yeah. And so if we're thinking about borders, I think
right, people with nothing dangerous on them,
mm-hmm.
they're just brown people.
Yeah. And so like when I think about like the US-Mexico border, like so much of the US-Mexico border has been constructed in the last 30 years.
Right.
It's not this like long-term problem that a lot of people think about. It's like the Mexican migration was basically like unlimited and until the 50s, and it was de facto unlimited until like the 80s. People would migrate back and forth every day across the border, right. and now that we've restricted it, we've actually like caused more migration, but unsafe migration, because people are forced to travel and they don't have the ability to move back, and so then they're left separated from their family for a period of time. Or they're forced to travel through the desert where we're killing people because we decide to block off the entrances that are safe. Right.
I'm a big nerd about Israel and Palestine, and one of the things that's so brutal there. And I'm generally speaking, I'm for human rights across the board, right? And Hamas has done things that I don't agree with, but I generally I believe that in Palestinian liberation, and so. The checkpoints, being able to, having to go through these giant processes to just get through to where you work from where you live every single day. It's a way that the state of Israel just, oppresses, and I guess the word I'm really looking for is it takes money out of people's pockets too at the most practical level. Let's say you don't know anything about this. Well, just imagine if you because I live in the county, we're in Lane County, we're technically not in the city of Eugene, even though this house has a Eugene, Oregon address. Think about if I had to like fucking take my car to a toll booth and sit there for 45 minutes at the corner of Hilliard and River Road every day to get to downtown Eugene to do work. Yeah. And ultimately, there's the guise of it being about, I guess it's not a totally guise. I'm not informed enough to really talk about it, but it purports to be about safety, and it's much more about control and about protection of, yes, these borders protect who we are as a people, as an identity. So I get what you're saying. My concern is just that everybody agrees in some form of border or boundary. It's just a matter of kind of where you draw that line, because my garage door is open right now so leafy green can shine on you. But if it were closed, everybody would get the message that the freaking garage door is closed. And if it were open all the time, it would create a different sense of what kind of privacy I have in the house. Mm-hmm. So, I think governance and good governance is about realizing scale and realizing that if you want to communicate to a lot of people, and I know this as an educator, about, a border, a national political border, maybe you can use a metaphor that's smaller because like counties don't exist. States don't exist. They just kind of are decided upon. And I think that if you study kind of the way that things scale outward, most national political issues that we deal with at the federal level, you can see at the state level. Like Oregon has a House of Representatives and a Senate, and then the Lane County Board of Commissioners. You could see the corruption that happens there based on, which commissioner's from the wealthier part of the county and which commissioner is not. And so that's why I just wish there was a greater connect for more people, connection between the national issues that we see on national news and get attention, and the fact that they're very, very reflected in and changeable within your local community. Obviously, I'm running for mayor, so I want people to support me because I'm a climate activist to a degree, and I believe that education, mental health, climate, housing, and art could all be better improved by a more responsive Eugene government. Yeah, that was a ramble. I don't remember. I'm just going to shut up and let you say stuff.
I don't even know where to go.
Cool. Well, we'll end soon anyway. But I always like to ask people, what is one way that you think, and you can interpret this any way you want, that we could all be less stupid? Actionable.
Okay. I think there's a couple things. And I know you said one, but I might take a couple. One of them is I always like to, I think one of the biggest questions that we need to ask in our society is always for who. So whenever any action is taken, ask the question, for who is this? Or like, who is this for? Because every policy that gets changed on a federal level or on a local level, or any, like many of our like companies, they're taking actions for somebody. It's there's a beneficiary, and we have to ask the question, who is this for? And so I think that relates to climate change. I think that relates to immigration policy. I think that relates to all kinds of different social issues. And so I think that's something that like I've tried to do a little bit more, is just and keep asking that question, like 3 or 4 times, like ask the who and why questions and go for depth. Because we were talking earlier about you were talking about like Facebook and Instagram, like being centering brevity, and you're not going to go and look for something longer. Sure. And I think it's really hard.
I just think on a rhythmic, bodily level, we are so conditioned now to evaluate really quickly from the first couple of words or a first glance at an image whether it's worth our time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's troubling, because the things that are really worth your time, you can't get a sense of in the first 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Or 10 seconds.
Yeah. And then I think the one other thing that I have been trying to emphasize lately is, in terms of the climate strikes and climate action, Greta Thunberg.
I'm so glad you brought her up.
Yeah.
Is she 16?
She's 16.
She's a remarkably good speaker.
She's a phenomenal speaker, and she's incredible. And I also want to emphasize that she's been highlighted for particular reasons. There have been people who fought for a long time, many youth activists who fought for a long time in Black and brown and indigenous communities.
Or like David Hogg from the Parkland thing.
Yeah.
It's often easy to see the privileged identities taking hold. And then you got someone like Emma Gonzalez, who I don't know what you're referring to specifically, but she is more just like, just a hellraiser who is like, fuck you, you're going to respect me no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
But Greta Thunberg is more like, I can see the ways that, her privileges and her identities and her education all contribute to this massive amount of support for her and what she did, because she spoke articulately for 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
When the people that really do the hard work every day or have the most at stake for, God, what was the phrase she kept using? It was a great phrase. It was like, how dare you? It was how dare you?
How dare you? Yeah.
Yes, how dare they do that? But also, you're not going to be as affected by it as a 16-year-old person that you are compared to many, many other people.
Yeah, and I think so. One of the things is I don't think that means that is in any way a dig on her.
Of course.
And I think she's done absolutely incredible work in using her privilege to speak truth to power. But I also think that like highlighting activists who've been doing a lot of work in the United States or in many places. One of the things I was thinking about in terms of like the reason she got famous was because of her school strike for climate out over in Sweden. And I in the last year I worked with a community in Ecuador that was doing mining resistance, and children, like whole families, were quitting all of their work to join a blockade to block a mining company from basically coming into their community, and they were fighting for climate justice. And they like were all they had a 5-month-long strike where they were like in constant blockade of this mine, and half of their community worked in the mine. So this was like devastating to the community, but they needed to fight for it. But the publicity that got was a mere fraction of what like somebody who has a lot more privilege gets.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything about it.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things is just like asking or like looking into other activists and other people who've done a lot of really good work. So like a couple that I think are worth highlighting are
yes, please.
The like This Is 0 Hour is a youth movement that's and their executive director Jamie Margolin has done incredible work, and also other people in the youth climate coalition would be like people like Isra Hersey, who is also has a lot of privilege because she's Ilhan Omar's daughter, but has done really, really powerful work in this realm. And then there are a lot of people. Who are some other folks that I'm thinking of? Jerome Foster has done good stuff.
Right.
I'm trying to. There are a lot of people. I think one of the things is also that I don't know a lot of these names still. And a lot of the people who've done really great work, because I think they're behind the scenes in a lot of cases.
Very much so.
And so
people like my wonderful ex-girlfriend, who has been involved with the Sunrise movement for many, many months. And yeah, she just doesn't she's not an attention-seeking person at all. I'm an immensely attention-seeking person. I like to be in the limelight. I like to be talked about, whether it's even, mostly if it's good. But, I like to put myself out there. It's hard for me to live in a way where I do not do that. But a lot of great, great, great activists are not recognized in their own time because of the fact that they are not doing it for themselves. If they were, nobody would think they're great activists. Yeah. That's typically politicians. Politicians can be great activists, but they have to be self-aggrandizing enough, frankly. We're going to wrap up soon, but I love Ilhan Omar. I love the squad. Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts, Rashida Tlaib from Michigan, of course, Omar from Minnesota, and AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from the good old Bronx or Queens. I don't remember. Because her district encompasses both. She wouldn't take a meeting with me when I was in New York. It was a bummer. You talked on Talks with Tiger by Tiger Gruber. Check it out. A little bit about populism. No. I'm getting mixed up with Sam. Sam, sorry. He talked a lot about populism. Sam Pettit. And just the way human beings are. We are so conditioned to like what's new. And, as I settle on exactly what race I'm running, because it's kind of got mixed up a little bit, I'll be perfectly honest with you. There's a gentleman who's running for mayor. I was very excited to discover he was running for mayor based on the things he was running for and who he was and what I thought he could do. Then I talked to him for an hour on this show. And what I realized was that he's a really intelligent person who I'm not convinced that he's going to win because of his work ethic and his approach and whether he can really build the coalition he wants to. And so I cannot as a person who wants to have a better mayor in Eugene, I can't endorse him anymore unless he can prove to me that he's really, really gonna win. And so I'm probably gonna jump back into that race instead of Lane County Commissioner. And being an outsider only happens once, in a way, and so that's why I'm drafting a plan to win the mayoral race. That is a month by month plan, and it's just go big or go home, because like I just think that, for example, Bernie Sanders was the talk of the town in 2015. He'd been a fantastic national politician since the 70s or 80s, and the mayor of Burlington, Vermont before that, doing good work. But now he can't gather as much momentum because of the fact that he's old news and he's been subject to so much criticism. He still has tons of momentum and loyal support.
Also, I think because a lot of people have adopted a lot of what he stood for in 2015.
Yes.
Although that said, no one has adopted that to the extent that he still represents a lot of progressive policies.
Absolutely. Do you think he's who you would most support right now?
Yeah.
Good. Him, Yang, or Warren, any of those three, they will beat Trump, I think, if they're nominated, especially if we can thin that out by March or April. That would be ideal. Get lots of time to everybody get behind, everybody who cares about not having a xenophobic, lying, pathologically narcissistic president of the United States, because none of those three people exhibit those traits. So that's cool. Yeah, I think that's about it. Thanks for coming on. I would love to
having me.
Yeah, and I would love how can people get involved with either the Green New Deal or the Sunrise Movement?
Yeah, so the Sunrise Movement is a national movement. So if you're watching from Eugene, the Sunrise Movement Eugene will have a meeting on October 8th. And that location is still to be determined.
Cool.
So you can check out Sunrise Movement or Sunrise Eugene on Facebook or on Instagram, and we'll be like posting more information, and we're doing a lot more work on especially the local level, trying to get folks to endorse a local Green New Deal and really work on because it's going to be different in every community, and we want to make sure we are doing what's right for our community. So
I love it. And if you don't know much about the mechanics of the New Deal, the first one that basically saved our goddamn country, then learn about what it was really about. Because everybody thought that it was going to be socialism to have a safety net for elderly Americans, and now that's one of the most popular things. Social Security is one of the most popular governmental programs.
Yeah.
Because we all know that a 25-year-old like me, a 22-year-old,
you got it,
like you, has significant advantages in the workplace than people in their 60s and 70s who still need some level of income to survive. Actually, I just had a little thought about income, and another false ending here. But let me just say this: it's troubling to me that the exact same resource, Federal Reserve notes, whatever, U.S. currency, the dollar, is used for the things that are extravagant and unimportant, like a gold toilet, and for fundamental human survival, like rent, like food, what you need to sleep, medication, That's just it's not something where I know what the answer is, because in a system with any kind of markets, you're gonna have a currency. But how did we get to a point, especially when you walk around Eugene and you see that we have people struggling in Eugene and living on the streets? Some people aren't struggling and they're living on the streets, but we have a lot of people from all over who come to Eugene to be a part of a community who are possibly disabled, possibly have untreated mental health issues, possibly just believe in the idea of, I know you support communal living, or you have a lot more knowledge about communal living than I do that we didn't get to talk about. Maybe I'll get you back on sometime. And it's just fundamentally not moral, the situation we have we have reached where 3 people own more wealth than 50% of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally don't know how those people sleep at night.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
I think I mentioned probably on Talks with Tiger's podcast that I do have a deal with some of my friends from college that if I ever become a billionaire, they have full permission to kill me.
Yeah, you did say that.
Because I do think that it's unethical to be a billionaire. And
I'm
like,
not with you there. $1 billion is too small for me to say that. But it's also massive.
It's also massive.
1,000 millionaires is they have a lot of money. But, $1 trillion. I'm with you at $1 trillion. I'm with you at no individual should have $1 trillion. Sorry, trillionaires out there watching my show. But $1 billion, I mean, what can you do with $1 billion? Can you make an airline company? Probably not. I want to make an airline
company.
With $1 billion? Yeah, but not like a very big competitive one. Not at all the major airports. I wouldn't mind having $1 billion one day. I'll be honest with you. I'm a capitalist.
But I think if you have $1 billion,
I believe in incentives.
I think if you have $1 billion, then, and I think it could be ethical to be a billionaire if everybody has basic human needs satisfied. But as of right now,
universal basic income like Thomas Paine and Martin Luther King Jr. and even Milton Friedman support.
Yeah, I mean,
you can tell I watch Yang videos.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things. It's like, as of this moment, I think it's unethical to be a billionaire. It's possible that
in context. Yeah. Gosh, what was I just gonna say about that? It's just like I believe in a much higher marginal tax rate. Like people are so good at smearing the idea of a marginal tax rate to say 70% of all your money is being taken. No, 70% of everything above a certain threshold is taken. 30% of everything you're making once you're that rich is also already a lot of fucking money, and you keep you keep everything from the first in that particular tax. From that tax, you keep everything, and your first, like, I don't know. I literally don't know. I'm talking about the rate that AOC proposed of 70% a while back, and you have people like Bill Burr, who I admire, saying, you don't get that money. You don't get my money. 70% of my money. It's like, no, it's not 70% of your money. It's 70% of the top money from these people that have more money than they know what to do with many of the times. So if you look at, between the 1940s, 1970s, roughly, we had a better progressive tax system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, real quick, and then I'll say something about coal miners, and then I'll abruptly sign off. The tax system, I missed it. What was it? Anyone listening now, they get it. They get that I'm burnt out and whatever. I'm not an idiot. I just totally blanked on the tax thing. Oh, we have these progressive candidates who are finding good ways to get at that revenue, because the wealthy, who have controlled everything through lobbying and through just literally being the people in power, have basically made it so they keep much of their money, whether in offshore tax havens or just, they don't pay the taxes. They don't pay income tax for their companies. So you've got a wealth tax that Warren is proposing.
And Bernie.
And you've got a value added tax that Yang is proposing for sites like Amazon and Google and Facebook, that he wants to give a little bit of every, he says, robot truck mile, or every ad that you watch on Facebook, or every sale that happens on Amazon, where value is added to that transaction by one person's participation. Part of that money would go to the government. So because Amazon, for anybody who doesn't know, paid 0 in federal income tax last year, even though they are, honestly, God, I hate to be a plagiarist, but this is the exact phrase he uses. They're sucking up money from the entire retail industry and closing about 30% of American malls and stores.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, if we have this place where government goes so far off the rails of morality, then what is the point of having government at all? Here's the coal miner thing. I saw a great meme on the internet, and all it said was, if you think that sex workers sell their bodies, but coal miners don't, then there's a problem in your ethics. Because sex workers don't sell their bodies. They sell time and a service to people. Coal miners sell their time and a service, but and I'm not saying this. Okay, actually, both have a little bit of like you can walk away with having some collateral damage. Let's say if there's a violent situation that a sex worker experiences, but coal miners end up with immense respiratory problems, and they're both things that are. I don't know if I'd say admirable because I don't believe in the coal mining industry anymore, but I want to find a way to make a distinction. Here it is. Here's a way to wrap up my previous point. Social media promotes brevity, but brevity leads to oversimplification. And I want to have long-form discussions like you and I are having right now, where hopefully you can open up a little more and say, yes, I hate the coal mining industry. However, I benefit greatly from my laptop being on right now, and I get energy from a grid. Maybe part of that comes from coal mining. And however, the people participating might not have much of a choice.
Yeah.
And if you're in Appalachian America and that's the thing that your grandpa did and your father did, and it's the only good job you can get in your community while manufacturing jobs are getting shot off to different countries, then we need to find ways to promote you getting a job that helps us have energy and sustainability.
Yeah.
And you'll have pride in the work that you're doing. Because I believe in hard work. And there's people who do those jobs are really hard workers in terms of manual labor. I'm kind of not that. I like hard work in terms of writing and thinking. But I would never be a coal miner. I just wouldn't. Cool. Well, thanks, Tyee. I look forward to having you on again sometime in the future.
Thank you.
If you like the podcast, subscribe or whatever on the YouTubes. And then if you like me, hugh.2020.org, check out what we're going to do to build a stronger Eugene together and possibly donate $2 a month if you can. Thank you very much. Peace.